One of the incredible things in the last year is seeing how much momentum movements like MeToo and Time's Up have gathered online. What do you think will be the mark of success at the end of it? I mean, where do you think we can sort of start to say, yes, we've had success in these areas?
I think, so yeah, the internet was really useful in terms of being able to make an issue viral, but something being viral doesn't mean anything. Like, it doesn't, that in and of itself, it's not a marker. It doesn't necessarily create behavioural change. I think a good example of that was Coney 2012. That didn't mean anything, but everyone remembers that cultural moment. But I think
everyone had the wristband.
Yeah, I still haven't seen the video because I was like, nah, everyone's watching this, so it mustn't be cool. But like, I think unless there are some real policy and like structural changes and cultural changes, which I think people are, I think that is translating through. I think, yeah, I think unless it's like we're seeing some real changes and people and behavioural changes and not just sharing articles or whatever, then it doesn't really mean much.
I bet you, like today, I know this will be out of date by the time audiences at home are watching it, but today Roseanne got her show cut because she tweeted something about an African-American woman.
Yeah.
Now that is change,
Yeah,
isn't it? You say
is.
something stupid and they'll say, right, we'll take you off air.
Yeah.
You know, like those are the good effects of it that I think we are trying to have some standards of respect when it comes to race and when it comes to gender and when it comes to, you know, sexuality. We're trying to impose that in our societies, and social media has driven that in many ways. So I think that's a great thing. But yes, in Australia, we certainly do need structural change. Like, you know, we need recognition, we need treaties, we need the Makarrata process, we need these structural changes to deal with the history and the past that is still with us and solve things into the present. So social media can be really great for that, to driving that change, building power. Because the thing about social media is it's people, right? If you get a lot of people, a lot of people behind a cause, governments listen to that because, of course, it's about the votes. So the way that we need to bring people with us is to bring Australians with us, to have an impact on policy, to have an impact on politicians, to sway public opinion. So I think media for Indigenous people and theatre and expression is essential because we get out to the public, we put them in our shoes, we tell them our story, and by that they are moved and they understand, and that generates change. I think it's hard to see it. You know, you don't see it in a practical sense, how you change hearts and minds. It's hard to measure. You know, it's not like building a house or giving a scholarship, but I think it changes culture and it changes perception, and ultimately we can change the nation. But maybe I'm naive, but that's my hope.
Yeah. Do you think that sort of swift retribution for, you know, poor behaviour online, do you think that that's the measure for these sorts of campaigns, Nakia?
Not necessarily. Like, I think it shows that, you know, that there has been a value shift, whereas like once they would have just dealt with it by ignoring it or just letting, you know, kind of the flames settle.
Well, they did with her, for years, Roseanne.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, she's been
That's right.
pretty misbehaving poorly. It's like surprised she got the show up, you know.
She's a shocker.
Yeah, she really is. Yeah, it's like this is the straw that broke the camel's back. I guess with Me Too and Time's Up, but Me Too specifically, I mean, so much of that has been led by the states. We've had our own incidences here, and we have our own kind of conversation that's happening. But it is, you know, our structures and the way that we fund things is very different to how it works over there. I think, you know, it's sometimes people making decisions out of fear can be very effective for the short term, but is there long-term change in that? I guess that's kind of my question, is like, how do you, like, what is the long-term change of the conversation that we're having, where there's, you know, a lot of people watching, and it is a very, like, topical time. I wonder, you know, is it you just will Roxanne, will she pop her head up, you know, later in another couple of years? You know, like, who's the person who commissioned the show? Like, I don't know. And I just wonder about when we're having these conversations about these behaviours that we get, you know, that it's when you don't have a lot of power, you take it away from those who are closest to you. And sometimes that can blind you from seeing the light through the trees. And I just wonder, you know, are we going to actually start to chip away at like what holds power?
Yeah.
I don't know, can you ever eradicate that kind of behaviour? I'm not sure that you can. But the thing that is happening now, and which is the good thing, is that we are having a conversation about it. Women feel brave enough now to actually come out and name their accusers and talk about it. And so there is change happening on those individual fronts, but it is famous people. You know, I don't know how much that movement is going to actually change for, you know, normal people and people living in regional, remote, wherever communities. I'm not sure if it will trickle down that far. Do they even know what's happening with the MeToo movement? I'm not sure.
We made a film about the abuse of women in the Indigenous political movement. It was a couple of years ago. It was in advance of the MeToo movement, and we got caned by other Indigenous women for, you know, what do they say? You know, marking Aboriginal men. You know, being like the intervention. I was like, no, hang on a second. Aboriginal women or Torres Strait Islander women should be able to talk about the violence inflicted upon them in their communities without fearing that they're going to bring down the movement on all black men.
Absolutely.
So I feel like the Me Too movement hasn't yet made it to our community, unfortunately. And that might be a really, you know, I don't have a measure of that, but in my own experience, that's been the case, that it's a slow take-up because we're so worried about criticising ourselves in our own communities because, you know, then the intervention comes down on you, you know, so
that's
tricky.
right.
To silence victims like that, it's like a second wave of violence, isn't it?
Well, it just, you know, it just continues as the person that I made the film with continues the cycle of violence because you don't call it what it is and stop it. So, yeah, I think we have much progress to make in that regard.
Back to your point about retribution and like say something like Roseanne or even say someone like Harvey Weinstein where that was almost immediately, that I think...
Well, it felt like almost immediately, but
it
things
wasn't,
were going on for 20 years.
It was years and the journalism that went into that, it was years of journalism.
Years and years, yeah.
But in terms of the effects, it was immediate. Like
Once it was out.
Yeah, like being I think he was forced to resign or he quit or...
Within days, yeah.
I think there's a big difference between that and a culture of... I think we need to... There are some things where it's okay to stuff up. Like you're allowed to make... There's some mistakes I think you're allowed to make. Like if your politics aren't necessarily perfect or if you don't know enough about something, it's okay to make a mistake. I think in stuff like call-out culture where people are like, you know, this person has this kind of politics, so they're cut off forever, they're a bad person. It's very different to, say, I think, sexually assaulting someone. And I think there's some stuff where people should have room to grow and we should be able to call people in, just be like, hey, I expect a bit better from you. And there's some stuff that falls into that. I don't think sexual harassment and assault is one of them. So I think, but in terms of is this fear of retribution just going to make people more sneaky or more like, you know, try to get away with it in a different kind of way? Or will it actually, you know, will this movement actually result in men and, you know, other people do this stuff as well, but largely it's men who are doing this. Will that result in them not feeling entitled to sexually assault someone at their work? So how do you create a culture where boys and men don't feel entitled to do that? And I think having large-scale condemnation of that behaviour is a good thing because we don't really talk about it. And it'll also allow us as a people to learn more about how to respond to this sort of disclosure. So I think that's something that I've definitely learnt. Like, it's definitely helped me, you know, be a better kind of support person for these kinds of disclosures. So I don't know. I think I don't know what it all means.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because as Aboriginal Indigenous women, you want to raise your sons to be respectful, to look after their mother when she gets old, to, you know, respect other women and every other person. But then there is that other thing, like from my mum's generation, where they hid the violence. You know, that there was that hiding it. It was kind of pushed under the carpet. It was actually, you know, oh, everything's fine. You know, meanwhile, it's getting, you know, slapped around at night. So it's kind of like, as Aboriginal women, we have to take responsibility as well to raise our sons in a particular way and to stop hiding it. And it's terrible that you were treated like that in terms of making Lani's story, I guess, is what you're talking about.
Well, we've made a couple now, actually.
Yeah, but
I think
but
also,
you know,
though-
because women can be the biggest hiders of this stuff.
But I'm sorry, but it's not our, like, I think I agree with what you're saying, but I think you're placing the burden on victims also to have to not only experience the violence, but then also communicate the violence effectively to those around them, which is quite the burden. I think responsibility also needs to be on men to, well, don't hit people. And I don't think it's unreasonable to expect to go to work and not be sexually assaulted by the men that you work with as well. So I think, like, yes, absolutely, like, we need to feel like it's safe enough to report this stuff. And I think we haven't had that in the past, or at least in my family it hasn't been the case. But yeah, I think, like, the onus is also on men.
Oh no, absolutely, and I agree with you. Fathers have to raise their sons, and you know, in a proper and respectful way as well. Yeah,
But I think,
put it all on the women.
feeding into what you were saying though, there is a reluctance to speak openly about that because you don't want to paint your brothers or your uncles or your grandfather as you know, men who perpetrate this sort of violence against women like us. You know, there's a reluctance that the repercussions or the judgment won't just come from within your own community, but the community more broadly against all black people or people of colour.
That's right. I think it's our Achilles heel.
Yeah.
You know, that we endure this stuff because we are worried that we will just bring more retribution down on ourselves. So it's really sad, and that's why we suffer such large scale, and it's just true, and we've got to own it. You know, domestic violence in our community, it's just debilitating, particularly where I'm from. So, you know, I think the NAIDOC theme, because of Her We Can, is really important because it talks about, the uplifting of our women and girls and the protection of them, and that's what I take from it, and also how precious they are to our community. So it's just great that NAIDOC has embraced that nationally, and that women appreciate it, and that we get to sit around and talk to each other on the national broadcaster about things that are interesting and important for us as, Indigenous women. So it's good.
Yeah, and just to contribute at that, like to add to that point and just to take it a few steps back, is I had a chat to my mum about feminism, and she's only just recently identified as a feminist. And I was like, well, like, you're aware of it. Like, she knew about it. She's like, but for us, it was just surviving.
Yeah.
Right? And when my biological father used to hit her and things like that, and she would hide it from people, it was because she was afraid that if she reported him or if she caught the coppers, that he would go to jail and he'd be like another death in custody or whatever. But the thing is that when talking about, like, as you said, Sal, that conversation is so important, is that, like, we have this conversation now. Now I get to talk about it at a bigger level. And going into that MeToo stuff, the right to work in a place where you're not, like, sexually assaulted or harassed, I agree. But I also think it's a bigger conversation than just the sex stuff. Like, we live in a community that's intersectional, it's like there needs to, I think, be more, like, why I think we need to be talking about the power structures and the culture that allows this to happen, as opposed to just the guys who perpetrate it. I remember this director took me out to lunch once. This is going to go too weird, but he took me out to lunch and he wanted me to read this play he was working on. It was this white guy, and it was this Aboriginal story, and he had this Aboriginal person attached, but this white guy was writing it. And he was like, so do you think that this is do you think that this white guy should be allowed to write it? And I was like, I have really no idea what this story is about, and I don't know this community, and I think everything's very context-based. I can't really give you like a clear thought on it. And then he then proceeded to go into this rant about how Aboriginal writers haven't stepped up, and that white writers, like our great white male writers from, like the 80s and the 90s, all stepped aside to allow to allow black writers to step up, but none of us have written that great land rights play,
Really?
that great native title play. And he said, where's the great intervention play? And I was like, come on, motherfucker, like it's still happening. There is no great intervention play. Great and intervention do not go together. And then I was there trying to justify why I was writing like a little romantic comedy. Like it was, you know, just being like, well, I just think that this is, you know, it tackles issues. But it was this kind of idea of, you know, I didn't realise until I walked out of that lunch and I called my mum and she was like, he's a racist. And luckily, like, he's left now and gone back to the UK. But I guess what I'm saying is that, you know, there's that level of racism and entitlement and this power structure that allows toxic behaviours which then exploit people's boundaries to happen.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if our conversation necessarily is focusing enough on that when, you know, you get with divisive media as well. Like it's tough.